Okay, so today we're going to be running through how to do a yeast starter. This video will be in the basics of home brewing playlist, but it will also be in the yeast playlist. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of videos to do with yeast. The first one is a yeast starter, how to do a yeast starter, and then we're going to be moving on to how to make your own agar plates and yeast slants so that we can take yeast and put it on the slants or the plates, grow it, and then store it in your fridge for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. After that, we're going to be also showing how to grab yeast from a bottle and then put it on the yeast plate, for example, or the slant, and then grow the colony and then store it for a couple of weeks, couple of months. Eventually we'll get on to doing that with bacteria and kind of separating bacteria from yeast and so on. But if you'd like these type of videos, if you'd like to see these, please let us know, comment. If you could subscribe and help us build this channel, that'd be very much appreciated. And let's get on to the actual yeast starter. So there's four main phases of a yeast life cycle. There's the lag phase, the growth phase, the fermentation phase, and the sedimentation phase. We won't go into the details of those, maybe in another video, but essentially it's important to make sure you pitch the right amount of yeast and the yeast is healthy and ready to go by the time it hits your wort. Of course, aerating is beneficial to it, but making sure that yeast, you have the right amount and it's healthy yeast and it's ready to go. So we don't want to be pitching too much, we don't want to be pitching too little. Pitching too little can put stress on the yeast. Pitching too much won't allow the yeast to go through their four phases of the life cycle. So it's important that we do a starter, we make sure that yeast is healthy, and today we're going to run through how to do that. Okay, so here's what you're going to need to make a yeast starter. So the first thing is the flask. Various sizes available. Just make sure that that is designed for this purpose, that it can be put over a flame, because we'll be doing this on the stove today. We need a funnel, star sand, dry malt extract, yeast nutrients if you're using it, aluminium foil, scales, stir plate. It's not essential, but it'll make your life a little bit easier. A magnetic stir plate that goes inside of the flask if you're using a stir plate. Iced water to cool the wort after we've boiled it. And then, of course, a thermometer and the actual yeast itself. For my starter, I'll be using RO water. So you probably noticed that the stir plate is a little ghetto, but this is just essentially just a computer fan that we've modified. Added some magnets, and that will stir the magnetic rod. If you're interested in knowing how to build one of these, again, like and subscribe, send us a comment, and we can do a video around how to create one of these on the cheap. And let's go across to Brewfather now to calculate how much DME we'll need to add to the flask and how much water we'll need to add to it. Okay, so jumping across to Brewfather, we need to calculate how much DME we're going to use and how big our starter is going to need to be for this particular recipe. If we go down to where the yeast section is and we select calculate, the first thing we need to do is select the gravity range that we're going to be shooting for here, the manufacturing date, so the yeast viability, I guess, which is March 12, 2020. They'll tell you can use one packet, and then the gravity that you're shooting for here is 1036. If you adjust this will adjust the size of the starter, the DME and the litres, but this one here I'm just going to stick with this. So we're shooting for 1036, 2.1 litre starter with 206 grams of DME. Okay, so for this recipe, it's a 2.1 litre starter with 206 grams of DME. So I try to clean everything beforehand. I like to sanitize my flask, but the heating and the boiling should sanitize the inside of it anyway. So obviously everything's got to be clean. Now we'll just add the 206 grams of dry malt extract in there, and then add the RO water to get it up to 2.1 litres. Okay, so now it's up to 2.1 litres. Now's a good time to add the yeast nutrients. Just a teaspoon of that in there. Now, you want to make sure you have something to grab this. I've just got like a tea towel. This is going to get really hot, and you're going to need to both swirl it to mix up, make sure there's no lumps of the DME in there, but then also to stop it if it does boil over. Otherwise, you will have a mess. Trust me, I've done it. It's not pretty. So let's bring it up to a boil for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll take it out, and then we'll cool it down to pitching temperature. So after you bring it up to a boil, then that's a good time to start preparing your ice water. You can see just here, it's just foamed up. Just take it off the heat. I'm going to have to do this a few times and throw it back on the heat. Swirl it around, making sure all the DME is mixed up. Turn it down a little bit. Just so it's not so much of an aggressive boil. And we'll have to take this off a few more times and kind of make sure it doesn't boil over. Okay, so we've been boiling for about 10 minutes. I'm going to put some aluminium foil on top of this flask. That'll help to sterilize it. You can sterilize the aluminium foil beforehand, but the heat will sanitize the aluminium foil. So when you put it on, just put it on, don't put it on too tight. You want it to kind of sanitize the top of the foil, and you'll hold on to this after you pitch the yeast. Okay, so now we're going to place this into some cold water. As I say, you want to fill it up a little less than what I have, just because now it's kind of floating a little bit. So I'll let a little bit of water out of this. You want it to kind of fill it up equal to what you've got in your actual flask. So I'll let this cool down to pitching temperature, which I believe is 21 degrees. I'll double check that, and then we'll cool this down, and then I'll come back when we're pitching the yeast. Okay, so now we're down to pitching temperature, 18.8, 19 degrees here. So I've been sanitizing the scissors, and I've got my yeast ready. Just going to make a little cut at the top here, and then take this off, and then pitch the yeast. And making sure that we don't come into contact with anything. Make sure all that yeast gets in there. And to add the stirring bar, which is of course already sanitized. Swirl that around. Then we're going to put that onto the stir plate. Okay, so I've just turned on the stir plate. We want to make sure that the aluminium foil here is loose, but not too loose, of course. We want oxygen to come into that, and you want to kind of get the whirlpool going. So it's constantly moving. Alternatively, if you didn't have one of these, you could just grab a flask every now and again, give it a bit of a shake just to kind of make sure that it's moving around. So I'll leave this for about 24 hours. It should turn a nice little lighter colour, and after that then we'll put it in the fridge in cold crash, decant the wort before we pitch to our fermentation vessel. Okay, so we've had the yeast starter on the stir plate for about a day and a half. We're going to be brewing tomorrow, so we want to cold crash it in the fridge, let all that yeast kind of drop out. So that yeast will then drop to the bottom, flocculate, and it will drop to the bottom. And then tomorrow, before we pitch, we'll kind of decant the wort on top, being left with just a little bit of the actual yeast on the bottom. Kind of swirl that around, and then we're ready to pitch. So we'll come back then. Okay, so it's almost ready to pitch yeast. This has been cold crashing for just under 24 hours. You can see all the yeast has settled on the bottom. So we're just going to decant. We're going to pour very slowly and get rid of this wort on the top, and then we're going to leave just a little bit down the bottom and swish it around and then add it. Of course, before you pitch that yeast, there's a stir bar in here at the moment, so just make sure that you use like a strainer. Obviously that's got to be sanitized. Don't drop the magnetic bar in the fermenter. So this is what you should be left with. I've decanted most of the wort, gave it a nice little shake. We want to bring this down to pitching temperature because it's been sitting in the fridge, so we'll leave this out, try to get a temperature of it, and then we will aerate the wort and pitch the yeast. And that's how you do a yeast starter.